about to see and hear some of the most amazing stories in man's conquest of the impossible. How this man helped his father to create the towering tribute of Mount Rushmore. How this man plans to build a bridge from Alaska to Russia. You can drive from New York to Paris. How this man walked high above San Francisco Bay to help create the Golden Gate. How this man predicts flying buildings of the future. You will relive some of man's greatest achievements and will look into the unbelievable future as we proudly present It Couldn't Be Done.
Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done. Crossing the uncrossable, blasting ton by ton. Gonna build that bridge, gonna build that dam, gonna build that road, gonna do what I can. Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done.
It Couldn't Be Done stars as your host and narrator, Academy Award winner Lee Marvin, with special guest stars, The Fifth Dimension, introducing folk singer Steve Mills, and featuring the American working men who did the impossible. This program is brought to you by the Bell System. All day, every day, serving you. And now, the star of Paint Your Wagon and Monty Walsh, your host, Lee Marvin.
Man has always strived for immortality. Some large or small way of letting generations to come know that he has been here. If the task happens to be one that the experts say cannot possibly be done, then the challenge is even greater.
The urge to leave our individual mark on this earth is with us all. A child's sandcastle might easily wash away, but his dreams might someday lead to conquering the impossible. Such a dreamer was sculptor Couldnt Borglum. In 1927, Borglum, working on a model in a studio near Mount Rushmore, South Dakota, began a project that the experts said simply couldn't be done. As a tribute to American democracy, Borglum had decided to carve the world's largest memorial out of the solid granite of the Black Hills. His son, Lincoln Borglum, supervised much of the carving and remembers the tremendous difficulties his father faced.
This was a thing to convince people that you could go up onto the side of a mountain, a piece of raw granite, and create a memorial. The usual reaction was that it was impossible, that it couldn't be done. And of course, this goes back to the basic thinking that most people feel that nothing can be done if they haven't seen it done before. We tried to use trained stone carvers. When you took them out of the environment of a stone quarry and hung them on the side of a mountain on the end of a cable, and they looked down between their legs and they see 300 feet straight down to the ground, their perspective all changed and their work suffered entirely from it. I mean, they were not happy. All they were interested in was getting back up that cable to the top of the mountain. I think you constantly lived with danger, but it was a calculated risk so that you weren't really worried about it. You knew that if you stepped back off the scaffolding, you'd fall a couple hundred feet, so you didn't step back off the scaffolding.
Work often stopped because of the lack of money. Couldnt Borglum had to make frequent trips to Washington to plead for additional funds. With good weather and sunlight only available a few months of each year, Lincoln Borglum and his co-workers struggled against the odds and the granite of the Black Hills. There was no textbook on mountain carving, and Couldnt Borglum, the artist, also had to become an engineer, a geologist, and a miner. But the artist always prevailed. Abraham Lincoln's eyes are lifelike because Borglum recessed the pupil to remain in the shadow, except for shafts of granite that reflect the light. Since the granite here erodes less than 1 inch every 100,000 years, Borglum was confident that his memorial would last for eternity. One of Borglum's assistant mountain carvers remembers a tourist.
Oh, some of the questions are marvelous. When I remember when I worked on Rushmore, they wanted to know what they did with the heads in the wintertime, and we always told them, well, you put them in the studio. I mean, after all, you can't leave them out there in the cold.
Father and son worked together for 13 years, and then, sadly, Gutson died a year before Rushmore was completed.
If it had not been for his dedication to this concept, it would never have been done. He mortgaged his immortal soul to see that it was going to be done. It's not basically a monument to the four figures that are up there, but to what these men represented in the growth and the progress of the United States. As much as I have been there, crawled all over that damn piece of rock, and measured every inch of it, time after time, I can't ever go back up there without getting a lump in my throat.
Gonna cut that rock, gonna shape that stone, gonna change that mountain on my own. Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done.
But Mount Rushmore was not to be the last of the mountain monuments.
We have the same principle as a jet engine. It has the same fuel, and we are carving with the backblast from the torch.
At Stone Mountain, Georgia, the largest single work of sculptural art in the world has just been completed. A tribute to the Confederacy featuring General Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and General Stonewall Jackson. The carved out area is approximately the size of a football field. We talked with Roy Faulkner, sculptor with a torch.
In the old days, in the 20s, when they were working up there was 30 and 35 men. Today, we have myself doing the carving, and I have 2 young men helping me. So that's a big crew of 3.
One man with a torch can carve in 8 hours what used to take 8 men a week to do by hand. But the danger is still there.
I think the funniest expression you can see on a man's face up there is where he'll be working on a platform, a scaffold, and to be working and take one step backwards and maybe step from just the thickness of a board from one level to the other, and you see his face go white and he looks around to see if anybody saw him. This is something that is a little humorous but dangerous at the same time.
Then there was Korjak Julkowski. Just a few miles from Mount Rushmore, also in the Black Hills of South Dakota, he and his 5 sons are carving the figure of Chief Crazy Horse as a tribute to the American Indians. Julkowski, now 61, has been planning and working on the project for over 30 years, ever since an Indian, Henry Standing Bear, asked him to carve a memorial for his people.
I had $174 to start this project. So I bought a cow and dug a well, lived in a tent down there, about 7 months. People are kind of skeptical about it.
To show the people his concept, Julkowski carved a huge detail model of Chief Crazy Horse. But when the monument is carved in the mountain, its size will be staggering. The Indian's head alone will be as large as the 4 heads of Mount Rushmore combined, and 4,000 people could stand in the area under the arm. Julkowski works without the benefit of government funds, preferring to keep his work independent.
Mr. Stuart Udall, I liked him very much. He was the Secretary of the Interior. He came here about 6 years ago. He said, Mr. Julkowski, how long will it take you to finish this project? And I said, I don't know, $5 or $10 million. He said, that's what I've heard. Well, he said, I'll tell you what you do. You come to Washington, we sit down, and we'll draw up an ironclad contract. And between the government, and yourself, and the Secretary of the Interior, and the Crazy Horse Commission. I said, an ironclad contract? I said, Mr. Secretary, tell me about those ironclad treaties you drew up with the Indians. Well, you know, he didn't get angry with me, thank heavens, because we are still good friends today. But you asked how much it's going to cost? It could have been done? Yes.
The skeptics and the doubters continue to question Korjak.
One day, years and years ago, I went down to watch the blast down at the studio. This fellow said to me, Mister, how do you know that Crazy Horse is in that mountain? Well, I looked at him. I didn't quite believe him, but he was serious. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I do. Every morning up there, I drill about 8, 10, 16-foot holes. And then I fill them full of dynamite. And just as I pull up the plunger, I say, Crazy Horse, are you there? And I push the plunger down, and he says,
Korjak Julkowski calls himself a storyteller in stone. But this veteran of Omaha Beach is also a dreamer who hopes to build here someday an Indian cultural center and university and medical complex. There are experts who say it can't be done and skeptics who say it will never be done. But Korjak continues his dream, a tribute to the Indians of America and to man's endurance to build the impossible.
Area code 202. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. The Lincoln Memorial. Jefferson Rotunda. And the Washington Monument. In 1832, when money was raised by subscription and blocks of stone were sent from every state, a lot of people said it couldn't be done, but it was. The Washington Monument was opened to the public in 1888. A hollow shaft of stone over 555 feet high. It has a high-speed elevator inside that whisks you to the top in 70 seconds. From here, you can see all of Washington. When you take your trip to Washington, share all the fun and excitement with your family by long distance.
The bridge builders of America certainly lead the parade when it comes to building what people said couldn't be done. For example, there was a guy back in 1867, James Eads was his name, and he announced to the world that he was going to bridge the mighty Mississippi River. Well, all the experts said that he was crazy. In fact, a convention of 27 of the world's leading engineers condemned the idea as foolhardy and irresponsible.
But Eads knew more about the turbulent Mississippi than any man alive, and he was a natural engineering genius. At St. Louis, he created a triple-span arch bridge over 1,500 feet, end to end. But he did it with a material that had never before been used for a bridge superstructure, steel. In 1873, Eads completed the so-called impossible bridge across the Mississippi, where it stands today, nearly a century later. At the same time, another gifted engineer, George Washington Roebling, took over the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, which had been started by his father. While fighting an underwater fire on the bridge foundation, Roebling suffered caisson disease from rapid decompression, what they call today the bends. Ahead of him was a decade of work, demanding the most exacting knowledge and technical skill. But now he was crippled with some brain damage and scarcely able to talk. And then began the unbelievable story. Although every movement was torture, Roebling devised a code with his wife, Emily, tapping on her arm to give her instructions. Emily, in turn, studied mathematics, engineering, and bridge design. Eventually, she was able to take her husband's tapped-out instructions and transmit his orders to his assistant engineers and to inspect construction. Roebling, when he was able, watched the progress from his window through binoculars. Thomas Edison took these rare pictures of the construction of the new Brooklyn Bridge. And then on May 24th, 1883, Roebling, looking through his binoculars, saw what his wife described as gray granite towers standing tall and strong with the cables shimmering in the sun. And as the mayors of New York and Brooklyn joined with the president, Chester Arthur, and Governor Grover Cleveland to officially open the bridge, tears streamed down the faces of Emily and George Roebling. After 13 torturous years, they had completed their Brooklyn Bridge. Since then, many famous and beautiful bridges have been created in America, such as the Verrazano Narrows in New York and the Royal Gorge Bridge in Colorado. And then there's what the bridge builders around the world call the bridge. By 1920, bridge designer Joseph Strauss had built 399 bridges throughout the world, and he dreamed that his 400th bridge would do the impossible, bridge the world-famous harbor of San Francisco. For 10 years, Strauss had opposition from all sides. Vested interests brought court injunctions claiming tolls would be excessive. Eminent geologists said that an earthquake would completely demolish any bridge across the Golden Gate. Some of the world's leading engineers claimed it would be totally impossible to work under the ferocious winds and tides of the channel. Many people protested that any bridge would ruin the natural beauty of the harbor. But in 1933, the voters of 5 Bay Area counties passed a $35 million bond issue, and Strauss started to build the bridge that couldn't possibly be built. Strauss designed the towers to rise 746 feet above the bay, 190 feet taller than the Washington Monument. He had little trouble with the North Tower since its foundation was on solid rock. But the foundation of the South Tower seemed to be an impossibility. Fighting channel depths of over 300 feet, with currents up to 15 and 20 knots, and winds sometimes as high as 75 miles an hour, Strauss had to construct what would be the equivalent of a 10-story building underwater. The access trestles to the foundation site were wrecked twice, first by a fog-bound ship, and then by a storm, and critics of the bridge screamed for a halt to the construction. For over a year, the bridge builders waged their historic fight. In conditions equivalent to the open sea, they blasted bombs on the channel floor and poured concrete into those 10-story underwater foundations. As the pier finally broke through the surface of the channel, it was hailed around the world as one of the engineering marvels of all time. However, the bridge builders' battle against the Golden Gate had only begun. During earthquakes, the towers swayed violently, and the men working at the top actually got seasick. But the towers continued their dramatic rise above the Golden Gate.
We're all set here. Are you ready, Barge? Okay, we're coming across. We're riding fair, reeling out fast.
The first cable was carried across the channel and hauled to the top of the tower. The first of 80,000 miles of wire. The cable spinning operation was underway.
Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done. Crossing the uncrossable with cables one by one. Gonna fight that wind, gonna fight that tide, gonna make it to the other side. Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done.
They had to fight storms, winds, currents, and fog throughout the next 3 years. Inspector Wesley Getz remembers his days on the towers.
We'd go out, take the elevator to the top of the San Francisco Tower, and then walk across the catwalk to the Marin Tower. It was usually foggy and windy and cold, good deal like today. And you wore rubber rain gear to keep dry. But by the time you had hiked up the catwalk to the top of the Marin Tower, it was like rubber rain gear, like being in a Turkish bath. You were just soaked to the skin. You might as well have left the rain gear off.
One day, trouble developed out on one of the cables. 2 bridge builders volunteered to climb out and fix the broken work carriage. One of the men, Clyde Hepworth, recalls his tightrope act high above the Golden Gate.
All trams are swimming in high. We got a tube of 6 and set it on 2 of the cables and slid out to clear up the cable. And they were going to bring us back, but they got us scared when we got out there. And we had to walk those cables. We walked from one cage to the other. That made Muggs and I the first 2 that ever crossed the Golden Gate.
As the bridge builders continued to fight the elements and fate itself, Bay Area residents watched in amazement as the bridge builders built the road in the sky. Slowly, the great steel arms inched closer together with man's first attempt to bridge a major harbor with the longest single span in history. The huge safety nets under the workmen had already caught and saved 19 lives when tragedy finally struck. One day, a wooden platform collapsed and crashed through the safety nets.
There were 2 men directly under me, maybe 200 feet from the tower. It rolled those 2 men up like in a cocoon. It hung there for possibly a minute and then broke loose, and that's the last we saw of those 2 fellows.
Those were 2 of 10 bridge builders who fell to their death on that tragic afternoon. But the bridge builders continued to fight the odds, struggling on to finish the bridge that couldn't be built. Strauss decided to give the bridge a distinctive color. International orange, he called it. And over 60,000 gallons were needed. But as bridgeman Walter Cathy recalls, not all of the paint went on the bridge.
We had a man, he had quite a little time on his hands. And he'd set snares and catch seagulls. He'd paint the tops of their heads red, and then he'd turn them loose. And one day we looked in the paper, and there was quite an article in there about the new species of seagulls with the red heads, and I guess he'd painted half the seagulls in San Francisco.
And then in May of 1937, 4.5 years after the start of construction, Strauss completed his 400th bridge. The bridge builders had created a poem in steel.
Area code 919. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Summer resort, deep sea fishing area, waterfowl haven, and the Wright Brothers Museum. Before 1903, everybody said it couldn't be done. Man wasn't meant to fly. But on this tiny field, Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first airplane flights under perfect control and under their own power. The longest flight was 852 feet. The top speed, about 30 miles an hour. It's all right here in this museum. It's worth the trip. But it's also a good idea to phone ahead for reservations before you leave for Kitty Hawk.
Three engineering miracles spanning over 100 years dramatically changed the history of the United States. The Erie Canal joining the Atlantic and the Great Lakes, the Transcontinental Railroad linking California and the East Coast, and the Panama Canal joining ocean to ocean were all considered impossibilities by many leading experts of their time.
Oh, the Erie was rising and the gin was getting low. I scarcely think that we'll get a drink to get to Buffalo. Get to Buffalo.
Between 1817 and 1825, Irish immigrants attracted by the wage of 80 cents a day used pick and shovel to create what was the longest man-made waterway in history, the Erie Canal. They carved out a canal 363 miles long over a trackless, mosquito-infested wilderness, working with primitive equipment and untested engineering ideas. But the builders of the Erie Canal created the impossible and joined the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean, revolutionizing commerce and trade throughout the northeastern United States.
There was a time in this fair land the railroad did not run, and the wild, majestic mountains stood alone against the sun. Long before the white man and long before the wheel, then the green, dark forest was too silent to be real.
Out in California, citizens were laughing at a man they nicknamed Crazy Judah. Judah had the insane idea of building a railroad through the gigantic Sierra Nevada. In 1865, thousands of Chinese laborers working with the Central Pacific began construction of Theodore Judah's railroad over some of the most treacherous mountains in the world. With no heavy machinery or dynamite available at the time, every foot was gained by pick and shovel. Blasting was done first with black powder and later with nitroglycerin, and the danger of landslides was chronic. Nevertheless, in 1869, the workers of the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific met at Promontory, Utah, and the United States was linked from ocean to ocean. Another attempt to link the oceans, this one across the Isthmus of Panama, had been started in the 1880s by the French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps, the builder of the Suez Canal. But after 50,000 of his canal workers had died from the combined effects of malaria, yellow fever, and the extreme heat, de Lesseps abandoned the project. But in 1903, the Americans attacked the impossible, man's centuries-old dream of joining the Atlantic and the Pacific, and thus eliminating the 10,000-mile voyage around the southern tip of South America. General Glenn Edgerton was there.
When I arrived in the canal zone in 1908, malaria was rampant, and every employee was supposed to take 3 grains of quinine a day as a preventive. If he got sick, why, of course, they gave him much more. Of course, the principal source of the common labor was the West India Islands, the British and the French. The British workers were very orderly, but the French workers were a little firmer, a little fiercer. They would attack a foreman occasionally.
Statistics were overwhelming. Over 55,000 men struggling in the 100-degree heat, while medical officers attacked the problems of malaria and yellow fever, and engineers tried to solve the infinite problems of construction. It would eventually take 60 million tons of dynamite to remove 270 million cubic yards of earth and rock, sometimes at the cost of $10 million a mile. The American medical team miraculously solved the problems of disease, and the engineers and the workers created the unbelievable locks. The locks, 1,000 feet long and 110 feet wide, are the largest in the world. The impossible Panama Canal became a fact. Former Canal Zone Governor and Congressman Maurice Thatcher, age 99, recalls.
Someone has well said that the construction of the Panama Canal constituted evidence of the greatest liberty that man had ever taken with nature.
Back in 1903, they said it couldn't be done. Joining 2 great oceans was a battle that couldn't be won. But they tempted fate and they fought disease, and in 11 years they joined the seas. Building the impossible, they said it couldn't be done. Jackhammer John was a jackhammer man, born with a jackhammer in his hand. Oh Lord, well I got them jackhammer blues. Yeah, I built your roads.
Woody Guthrie's song about the jackhammer man introduces one of the most colorful groups of them all, the dam builders. Americans have become the biggest builders of dams in the history of man. Since 1902, the Bureau of Reclamation has constructed over 195 dams without a single failure. But the life of the dam builder is the most hazardous in modern construction, accounting for more deaths than any other construction work. High scaler Joe Couldnt worked on the most famous and controversial of them all, Hoover Dam.
One time while working here, down here on the ropes, one of my very close buddies who was working directly with me, his knot slipped a little, and of course when your knot slips and there's 400 or 500 feet below you to fall, it gives you a rather thrill. And he grabbed a hold of his rope and held it up there, and he put his hands up right quick and says, "Hold on there, buddy, hold on." He was talking to his knot.
Located on the border of Arizona and Nevada, Hoover Dam was born in controversy. Engineers and geologists insisted that it would be impossible to build a wall across the treacherous Colorado River. They claimed that the first big flood would sweep the dam away and wipe out half of California in the process. But starting in 1930, sparked by the dreams of Arthur Powell Davis, the government started the pour of 7 million tons of concrete, the greatest weight that man has ever placed on Earth.
Hammered on Bonneville, Cooley too. Always broke when my job was through. Oh Lord, well I got them jackhammer blues. Been working on Hoover, hammering all night, trying to bring all the people some light.
So that the concrete mass would knit together in one piece, the pouring went on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, continuously for 2 years. Temperatures in the desert heat often reached well over 100 degrees, as recalled by Tommy Nelson.
Concrete does run a very high temperature. And some of these puddlers or trompers back in the diversion tunnels, the temperature perhaps exceeded 135 degrees Fahrenheit.
And Doug Moore also remembers the heat.
When you came home off the job, you didn't have to worry about hanging your clothes up. They were sweat-soaked and stiff with salt. You could just stand them in the corner where you got up to make the next shift. Well, you could just step into them and ready to go to work.
Even in the Depression days, there were some compensations.
Anderson's mess hall fed the men very, very good for $1.50 a day. And it's surprising how much lunch some of those guys could get into one of these boxes. They could cram 12 sandwiches and 3 or 4 oranges and 2 or 3 pieces of pie. It just made you wonder how they crammed it all in there.
Despite unprecedented safety measures at Hoover Dam, danger and death haunted those trying to tame the Colorado. The wild river, having been shut off by the huge dikes, rose 50 feet above the heads of the workers and seethed through rock tunnels on either side of them. Eventually, 98 men would lose their lives during construction. But after 6 long years, Hoover Dam was completed. It had introduced an unprecedented scope, style, and technique to dam building. It had created Lake Mead, the largest man-made lake in the world, a scenic wonder. And it was to irrigate the barren Southwest and to light the homes of millions in Southern California. Joe Couldnt recalls the final working days.
It was hard work, real hard work, and one man got laid off. That evening, as we was going home and as we was on our way home up by the hairpin curve where we turned around, the man looked back at this dam and looked at the great achievement of man's ability there as he's building, and he just stopped and he looked at it and he said, "I hope it leaks," he said.
Hammered in the rain and I hammered in the dust. I hammered in the best and hammered in the worst. Oh Lord, well I got them jackhammer blues.
Area code 314. St. Louis, Missouri, on the banks of the Mississippi. It's here, on the way north from New Orleans, that the blues stayed for good. Sports and breweries, cereals and chemicals, and the arch, the Gateway Arch. Even today, when it's all finished, you look at it and you say to yourself, it couldn't be done. But there it is, the gateway to the West. 630 feet of stainless steel, just standing there tall and proud. And you can even ride up one side and down the other. That's a trip you really ought to take. But please, phone ahead for your rooms before you head for the arch. The park can be mighty cold.
The dreamers of the impossible have always confounded the experts. In 1920, engineer Clifford Holland started construction of a tunnel between New York and New Jersey.
The building of the Holland Tunnel, actual building of it, wasn't as much of a problem as finding a plan, because that was the first automobile tunnel. And there were people that thought that that was an impossibility to take so many automobiles through so long a tunnel without asphyxiating people.
But Holland's chief designing engineer, Ole Singstad, created a revolutionary ventilation system for the Holland Tunnel and had the last laugh.
So we had estimated that ultimately the tunnel would carry 38,000 vehicles, but it would take a number of years before it reached that. But at Sunday midnight, after the first 24 hours, the traffic count was 52,000 vehicles. And one of the New York daily papers reported this, and it said the air in the tunnel was better than on Fifth Avenue.
And then there was the so-called impossible skyscraper, the Empire State. Its creators said that they could build it in less than 2 years, and that it would be able to withstand any force in nature. While skeptics watched in amazement, the tallest building in the world was completed in less than 14 months. As to its endurance, this was tested in 1945, when a B-25 crashed into the building at 250 miles an hour, ripping out a large section of the 79th floor. But no major structural damage occurred. But perhaps one of America's greatest engineering achievements is the highway system of the United States. Often taken for granted by Americans, and often maligned for its effects on our natural environment, the American highway network is nevertheless the engineering wonder of the 20th century. The most dramatic road building story in our lifetime happened just 30 years ago. Early in 1942, government contractors posted this notice in employment offices throughout the United States and Canada. This is no picnic. Working and living conditions on this job are as difficult as any encountered on any construction job ever done in the United States or foreign territory. Temperatures will range from 90 degrees above zero to 70 degrees below zero. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats will not only be annoying, but will cause bodily harm. If you are not prepared to work under these conditions, do not apply. With the start of World War II, there was an immediate strategic necessity to build an Alaskan highway and oil pipeline to the Arctic Circle. The road builders had less than a year to complete the 1,600-mile highway before the spring thaw of 1943. The builders had to cross the massive Canadian Rockies, bridge countless streams and swamps, and tear into hundreds of miles of bush. When temperatures hit 40 degrees below zero, machinery broke down. To add to the difficulties, the first thaw came before the job was completed. Sections of the road were threatened by melting ice. Bulldozers frequently sank in the ice or mud. It seemed an impossible task, but the builders completed their road on schedule.
And now, nearly 3 decades later, another road builder desires to go one step further. The Alaska Highway was conceived in war. This new road is conceived in peace.
Dr. T.Y. Lin of the University of California recently made world headlines when he proposed a highway to connect the United States with Russia. It would be a highway bridge across the Bering Sea, 50 miles long.
The purpose is to demonstrate to the world that it is quite possible to link the continents together, link the countries together, and the peoples together. And this can be easily done by bridging across the Bering Strait from Alaska to Siberia. In a distance of 50 miles, which is not very deep, a maximum depth of 180 feet, if we can build a bridge across, it will prove to the peoples of the world that we can work together and the whole world is one.
Dr. Lin would like to finance this billion-dollar project by having every American and every Russian contribute $2. Many experts say it can't be done, but Dr. Lin has no doubt that he will someday build his bridge of peace. There is another symbol of international understanding, the World Trade Center in New York City. It will become the world's tallest building, rising over 1,300 feet into the sky. From a helicopter, we see the New York skyline as it will appear from the top of the Trade Center. Even New York's tallest buildings seem to shrink in comparison. A steel worker, John McKeever, looked at this United Nations of Commerce, which he's helping to build.
That kangaroo up there is the one I'm working on right now, and after this job is over, maybe 15 years from now, I'll bring my children back here, my 3 sons, and I'll show them what we built here. The tallest building in the world.
And throughout the United States stand other impressive landmarks of man's ingenuity.
I've been doing some hard traveling, I thought you know. I've been doing some hard traveling, way down the road. I've been doing some hard traveling, hard rambling, hard gambling. I've been doing some hard traveling, Lord. I've been working in a hard rock tunnel, I thought you know. I've been leaning on a pressure drill, way down the road. A hammer flying, an arrow sucking, 6 feet of mud, I sure been mucking. I've been doing some hard traveling, Lord.
Area code 603. Mount Washington, New Hampshire. The highest mountain in the eastern part of the country. And it's the home of the world's first cog railway. Back in 1869, when the railway was first built, a lot of folks said it couldn't be done. But it was. Round trip up Mount Washington on the cog railway takes about 2 hours. The incline gets as steep as 37 degrees. It's an exciting and beautiful trip with lots to see and enjoy. You ought to try it. And when you do, keep in touch with home by phone.
And what about the future? What seemingly impossible dreams do designers and engineers share for the decades ahead? Powerful laser beams, capable of drilling holes in diamonds and welding metals, are just one revolutionary tool for the future working man. Helicopters will be adapted for even more extensive use in construction. Nuclear excavation of mountains and oceans will create everything from new canals linking the Atlantic and the Pacific to harbors in Alaska, to new roads and rail passages through mountain ranges, to new methods of recovery of natural resources. Many designers are testing the feasibility of living in caves with all the modern conveniences, while others are creating homes of new plastics which can float on water. The city of Baltimore is testing the feasibility of floating an entire community of 5,000. In the same way that the Astrodome covers the Houston Stadium, designers are now planning to put entire cities under glass with perfect environmental control year-round. Prefabricated housing on a massive scale is being tested for possible elimination of slums, and methods of pollution abatement through engineering are being designed by dreamers of the future. They told the Wright brothers that a heavier-than-air machine couldn't be built. They told Ford that the mass-produced automobile would never work. And they told Professor Robert Goddard in the 1920s that he'd never see rockets get off the ground. And today, some of the experts disagree with Arthur Clarke's contention that the next revolution in transportation will be what is called the ground effect machine, a vehicle that floats on air and can go anywhere in the world, over land or water. And Buckminster Fuller predicts that we'll all put jet wings on our backs and fly out the window on frequency beams.
You're going to see that aerospace industry converted into the development of a renting service industry where you see whole cities being delivered by air in one day. Just to see a whole fleet of ships of the sea coming into a harbor in a day, coming in from the air is even easier as we really try our highest capability. You'll see then buildings the size of the Empire State can be built horizontally in the aircraft plant. Otherwise, their environmental controls being produced in a controlled environment under most extraordinary advanced tooling. We had no human hands practically touch a thing, everything automated. We see this very rapid assemblies of these environment controls, and then they will be virtual lifted. They come out of their hangar factory, and when they get to the site, they will be turned from the horizontal, which is the easy way to move through the air, into the vertical. So this is what you're going to see, and you'll see this within 10 years from today.
And as the Clarks and the Fullers and other world planners and designers contemplate the year 2000, when 100 million more Americans will join the present 210 million population, their dreams turn to the great oceans, where 7/10 of the world exists.
Some designers have speculated that we will have floating cities of 50,000 people or more by the 21st century, after we have learned in the next few decades how to divert hurricanes and typhoons. And these floating cities will be able to move about and take advantage of the best climates available around the world.
John Lindbergh, son of another man who did what the experts said couldn't be done, is one of the foremost pioneers in underwater exploration. He and an associate spent 49 hours living in a 4x8 rubber tent at a depth of 432 feet in the Bahamas.
While the dive we made in the Bahamas helped to establish that it is possible for men to work at depths in excess of 400 feet, and since then we know that he can work at depths at 1,000 feet and more. In the years ahead, it's going to be increasingly important that we learn how to utilize the resources of the sea in depths beyond that to which man can dive, beyond which he can exist at the pressures involved. In order to cope with those pressures, he'll have to work and live in pressurized compartments at atmospheres that are very similar to those in which we're in right now. I think we can look forward to deep-sea oil exploration, deep-sea mineral exploitation, the development of biological resources. We can do all of these without damaging the ecology, but I think we will have to consider the ecology with every move that we make. Often in the past we have not done so.
And as the dreamers try to find solutions on land and on ocean floors, man continues his quest of the universe, of the moon, of Mars, of the solar system itself in a never-ending quest to do the impossible.
This weekend, and every weekend, you can telephone coast to coast for as little as 70 cents. It all began in Boston, 1876, with Alexander Graham Bell. The first telephone, the first switchboards, the first operators. Soon telephone lines to New York, to Chicago, and westward. And from San Francisco east. Lines from east and west meet in Utah. The year, 1915. The minimum rate on a call from New York to San Francisco in 1915, $20.70. Years pass. Phone service expands, and long-distance rates drop dramatically. The minimum rate for a coast-to-coast call by 1920 was $8.25. 1927, $5.50. 1940, $3. By 1963, $1 plus tax. Now, in 1970, the minimum is 70 cents plus tax, coast to coast, on calls you dial yourself on weekends. 70 cents for a 3-minute call from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Saturday and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Sunday. In 1915, $20.70. In 1970, 70 cents plus tax. They said it couldn't be done. But it was.
Now, these great stories of American engineering are not all glamorous chapters created by superheroes. These builders were men, not saints. And many of the workers, especially in the 19th century, were often grossly abused, overworked, and underpaid. But under good conditions and bad, these workers and the designers and the engineers who did their dreaming were certainly builders of the impossible.
Astronauts report it feels good. Ignition sequence 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Astronaut Neil Armstrong, when he returned from America's greatest engineering achievement, stated, "I felt a successful lunar landing might inspire men around the world to believe that impossible goals are possible, that there really is hope for solutions to humanity's problems." And the religious philosopher T.R. Desjardins has predicted, "Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire." It would seem that if American know-how, money, talent, perseverance, and just plain guts could build this dam, this roadway, this canal, this bridge, then certainly this know-how should be able to come up with imaginative answers. The pessimists are saying that we can't solve our problems, just as the pessimists told the Strausses and the Borglums that it couldn't be done.
But perhaps we have in our midst today visionaries who will be able to do with communication what builders have done in engineering to solve the impossible. Perhaps we can start building new bridges between each other.
we are.